Hey, welcome back to Ecommerce On Tap, brought to you by Sourcify and ISBA. I'm your host, Nathan Resnick, joined by my co-host, Aaron Alper. Aaron, how you doing today?
I'm doing pretty good, Nathan. How are you?
I'm cold. I woke up this morning and I don't know, it must have dropped overnight. It's like 40 degrees. As you can tell, I'm bundled up, but you're in Canada, which is, probably much colder. So, I can't complain.
Earlier this week, I would have said yes, but for whatever reason, it is warm, and I'm going to take it. I'm in shorts and a t-shirt today. It's like 60 degrees, but no, it is. Canada's going to be cold.
There we go. There we go. So today on E-commerce on Tap, we're covering Beautycounter, which is like a pretty incredible company that I think very few in the e-commerce D2C space know because they took an MLM route. So we're going to dive deep on MLMs, their leverage buyout. And this company hit scale like hundreds of millions in revenue through this MLM strategy. So super excited to dive in. But before we do, Aaron, do you want to give a quick overview for those listening to E-commerce on Tap for the first time?
Absolutely. So each week, Nathan and I pick an interesting company. Could have an interesting supply chain, interesting business model, interesting product. But what we do is we tell their founding story, reverse engineer their supply chain, and talk about their exit potential.
Yeah, and we enjoy it. I think my favorite episode still to this day is Liquid Death. I just love that story, love that brand. But I guess before we dive into Beautycounter, do you want to kind of touch on any interesting tidbits that caught your eye the past week?
Yeah, I had something that kind of made me do the double take this week, and that is that Chinese e-commerce hit 2.2 trillion dollars in 2024, and so that's a lot of money, and it's growing very very quickly. It's expected to be 3.6 trillion by 2028. So going up by 50% off of a number that big is enormous. And the article was talking a little bit about how they have e-commerce penetration about 83% in urban areas, 66% in rural areas. So there's still some room to grow, but you're reaching that saturation point. And a trillion is I can't even fathom that. It's like, okay, a billion's a big number, but you know people who are billionaires, or know of people who are billionaires. But a trillion is something different. And so I was like, well, how big is the U.S.? Well, the U.S. is estimated to be about 1.2 trillion. So the Chinese market is about $1 trillion bigger, and it's expected to grow to 1.8 trillion in 2028. So it's $1 trillion today bigger. It's going to be double the size of the U.S. market in 2028, and I think the government owes like $30 trillion if that's the metric we're looking at. So a lot of money there, and I think it speaks to how far ahead China is on so many things when it comes to e-commerce that as a North American based e-commerce person, you're really just not aware of because it's a separate internet.
Yeah, it's crazy having spent so much time in China. Just the different approaches they have to e-commerce, whether it be live shopping and group buying and all that, or whether it be their logistics in terms of how fast it is to get something to your door when you order online. We are definitely a few steps behind when it comes to e-commerce in America, but I think there's always going to be that kind of antidote that's true in terms of, consumers want things that are faster and cheaper, and that's I think what people are going to continue to build towards. So I definitely think we're going to see some pretty cool innovations in the next few years when it comes to e-commerce in America.
Yeah, I guess if you look at it from number of people, clearly China has so many more people than the U.S., and so on a per capita basis, our e-commerce market is bigger, I guess. But China's rapidly becoming more and more wealthy, and so it's just a necessity that's going to overtake in the future. But what stuck out to you?
Yeah, so I saw Havenly, which is kind of this like nine-figure platform that has acquired five brands in the last 2 years in kind of the furniture, home goods category. So they just acquired Burrow, which was founded in 2017, which was like that kind of modular flat pack sofa and chair brand. They raised $50 million, which like seemed kind of crazy for a furniture brand, but that's what they did. And so Heavenly has kind of rolled up some of these companies like Burrow, the Citizenry, Interior Define, St. Frank, and the Inside. And it seems like they've been very opportunistic about what's going on in the market. These brands have collectively raised over $150 million. So I think it was just interesting that someone's kind of still going down this path of rolling up these different brands and players in a certain category and trying to optimize them. And yeah, it's interesting. I hope they have a lot of success, and I think it makes sense on paper, but as we saw the past few years, some of these, roll-ups have not turned out to be too well. And even like if you see some of the publicly traded ones, like Solo Brands that has like Solo Stove and Chubby's and like Aura Kayak under it, they're publicly traded and they're trading for like well under what they're doing in revenue. And so I think the public markets have just, in general, not really liked these type of roll-ups, but just interesting kind of tidbit that I saw.
Yeah, there are definitely deals to be had if you've got the cash and the thesis behind it. So best of luck to them. I would think that they are trying to become a furniture company as opposed to a D2C company, right? So it's like we're going to have these brands. We want to compete with an Ashley Furniture or something like that, and that's a business model that is pretty well proven at this point.
Yeah, totally. So diving into Beautycounter, for those that don't know, basically set out to challenge these cosmetic giants with its quote unquote never list of banned ingredients that kind of shook up the multi-level marketing world. And so it's a pretty incredible journey in terms of, how it started, how it grew, how it got acquired, where it ended up and where it's at today. So I'm excited to dive in, but for me, I actually wasn't even that familiar with multi-level marketing before I moved to Utah. I had heard about it. And then in Utah, for those that don't know, MLMs are kind of like the epicenter here. You have like Young Living, you have just so many different MLMs that are at huge scale. Some of them are at hundreds of millions, if not, over $1 billion in revenue, which is pretty incredible.
Yeah, how would you define an MLM for those who are maybe new to the term?
Well, let me pitch you on my new MLM, okay? So
Okay.
let's say I am starting Nathan's Hats, right? I have this MLM called Nathan Hats. We produce the best hats in the world. And I'm going to sell you a package of 10 hats for $100, right? And so then you go and sell other sellers on this package, and I get a commission every time that you sell my package, right? And so the kind of multi-level of it is that whoever's at the top is kind of getting a take rate on top of the people below them. So they're kind of
Mm.
piling on commissions and affiliate fees, if you will. And it's very rare that, people at the bottom actually make money on these products because they're just selling the same packages kind of over and over again. And, I think it's a way that you can be your own kind of entrepreneur and your own boss is really what's pitched to these people. But, you don't own the brand. You don't really own the supply. You don't own the supply chain. You don't own the products. Like you're basically like a kind of independent sales person for this brand, but you're selling packages to other people to resell packages to, and you're trying to get, kind of a tiered system of sellers under you.
Yeah, I think it makes sense. It's you own your distribution channel, so it's one of those things where, you're with your example, it's not something where I buy it for $100 and then I try to sell it for $110. It's I buy it for $100 and I try to get other people to start selling it for $100, and maybe you're making $20 on it, and for the things that you sell directly, and then for the things that I sell, we split it, so you get 10 of my 20, and then if I get someone else to sell it, then I get part of their 20. So yeah, it's one of those things that you can get a lot of knock on MLMs is it's very triangular shape, or what's a three-dimensional triangle called? Oh, a pyramid. So that's one of the issues that a lot of people have with them. Have you ever thought about joining an MLM, or have you ever been around that world?
I think in college there was like some sort of like energy drink or energy supplement brand that was going around my college campus in San Diego, and I went to one of the meetings, and I kind of sniffed it out, and I was like, this isn't like a real business, really. I guess it is for ones that are like, on top selling these other packages, but for me, it's not like I'm making margin on this product, right? It wasn't a business for me. Have you experienced one?
I've been around it. I think the closest I got was my best friend's family. Um, Growing up, they were involved in Amway. They were pretty big into Amway in Ohio, and so I kind of saw things tangentially, and it was like, oh, there's that business, and here's those things there. And my friend and I, we actually ended up spending most of high school cleaning up some people's yards. That was kind of our job. And on my resume, I put I was a stick relocation engineer. Trying to pad it to get into college. But we'd weed the garden and pick up sticks and mulch and stuff like that. But they were very big into Amway, and they were kind of up at the top and had a very nice house. And so I kind of been around it for a while. And I remember after college, they asked like, "Hey, do you want to hear the pitch and kind of go through it?" And so I sat and listened to it and all those sorts of things. And uh, I can definitely see the appeal. It wasn't for me, but I know lots of people who it's been a great supplement to their business and to their lifestyles. And I think my aunt growing up always had a lot of stuff with like scrapbooking or cooking or things like that. So I've been around it more than I thought. Uh, but it is a business model that most people are not aware of.
Yeah, yeah, that's for sure. That's for sure. Well, let's dive in. I guess what is the history of MLMs too? I'm not even aware of that.
Yeah, so we're going to go back to the 1930s. And so this is, think, what was happening in the 30s. This was Great Depression time. And MLM started with US companies like Nutrilite that were trying to create these distributor networks around direct sales. And the key aspect of these networks is that they wanted the ability to earn commissions, not only for their sales, but for the people that they recruited to also do sales. So that was kind of the initial insight that was there is I want what I sell, but if I bring someone in who's actually a good salesman, I want a piece of that action as well. Well, that kind of continued a little bit, and really the first major milestone in the MLM development was Amway, and it was founded in 1959. And this is where basically some former Nutrilite distributors created Amway, and this was really the beginning. And they had an emphasis on building really close relationships with customers and using networking as a key factor for the success of their downstream people. And so it's very common to say, hey, you're going to sell this stuff. Go talk to your friends and see if they want to buy this stuff, and then see if they want to sell this stuff because you're able to help them. And so you start to tap into these family networks, these church networks, these neighborhood networks, and that was really the pieces that were there. Amway grew like a weed. It does several $billion now. It's a very large company. But in the 1970s, there was a lot of scrutiny. And so it wasn't just Amway. There were lots and lots of these sorts of companies. And there were federal investigations into MLMs as a business model and trying to understand, is this a pyramid scheme? And there's always one of these things where even if it's not a pyramid scheme or it's been proven it's not a pyramid scheme, which, by the way, in 1979, the FTC said that it was legal and like Amway's business model was an issue. There's always this concern around, hey, I know you say it's not a pyramid scheme, but it's actually a pyramid scheme, right? Right? And like, no, it's a triangle scheme, and it's different. It's the same as any other company. And so that's the difficulty that that MLMs have historically is that people immediately think, oh, it's a pyramid scheme, even though, as you'll see in the case of Beautycounter, it's really not that way at all. Um, well, once the FTC signs off and says that Amway and its business model is legal, you start to see this massive expansion in the 80s and 90s, not only with Amway, but new companies like Herbalife, Nu Skin, like you mentioned, they start to take this model into new categories. In the 2000s, you see the internet start to really supercharge the expansion of recruitment and sales for MLMs. And so this is where the joke where, there was that girl that was mean to you in high school that reaches out to you after 10 years and wants to rekindle a conversation and then says, oh, by the way, I've got this great business opportunity. That's where that kind of meme comes from. In the 2010s, there was, again, another round of legal issues. And companies like Herbalife settled some very large settlements, paying about $200 million and restructuring its business because it was kind of proven that it was a little bit misleading. Misleading in the sense of how much people would make by being a distributor and what would it cost to participate. I think the big issues for Herbalife was one that people had to buy the inventory, and you had to buy a certain amount of inventory, which in theory you were selling, but you had to buy a certain amount of inventory each month in order to keep your status or any benefits that you'd accrued. And then a lot of these companies were built around conferences and taking these distributors, having them come to a conference, paying for that conference, and then buying a course or a book or things like that. And so it started to look a little bit predatory there, where you were using your distributors as maybe the actual customer as opposed to a channel. But kind of today, MLMs are still very significant in the US. It's typically a US phenomenon. And it's one of those things that's a little bit murky around, is it legal? Is it not legal? And but they're here to stay for sure.
Yeah, I mean, I think the fuzziness in MLMs kind of stems from like understanding the difference between who's the like boss or the head of the pyramid, the company, and the MLM partner, because you kind of have like your own distribution network, which enables the parent company to grow independently and kind of altering kind of traditional business, power dynamics. And the key is that these distributors, have deep market penetration, like you said, within their neighborhoods or church groups or, whatever communities they can tap into. And the kind of personal relationships become their assets that, oftentimes give them significant influence over a company's operations and strategies. Which is a lot different than a typical company in that sense, where like your CMO is typically guiding your marketing strategy and defining what that looks like. But if you have a MLM partner that has the majority of your kind of MLM partners under him or her, then they could have a much stronger say in what direction they want the company to go. And so I think it's a bit of a challenge because obviously these communities change, trending products change, and it's this kind of like push pull dynamic in MLMs that we see often. But I mean, it's pretty incredible to see the size and scale that some of these MLMs have gotten to. I mean, that's something that really stuck out to me as I researched the market.
Yeah, and I think that like there is a place for MLMs. I don't think they're inherently a bad thing. Just personal opinion on this stuff, but I think that it has to be the right fit for the person. It has to be the right product. But I mean, think about what every other company tries to do when it comes to social selling and trying to get micro influencers and people to talk about something. And I think that for me, where it starts to get a little bit fuzzy and there might be a bit of a gray line is when you're trying to monopolize or capitalize on people's personal relationships, right? And so if I have if we're friends and we're friends for lots of things, but it starts to feel like, hey, you're really just a client to me versus a friend. That's where I think it's difficult, and you don't want that relationship to change. And so I don't know, like it's something you have to navigate. But enough about MLMs. Who started Beautycounter?
Yeah. So Beautycounter was founded by Greg Renfew. Is that how you pronounce it? Greg Renfew.
We're going with that.
All right. So she described herself as a serial entrepreneur, and she really is. So she kind of grew up in the Connecticut area, went to University of Vermont. After graduating, she joined Xerox sales training, and she kind of says she's been a serial entrepreneur because in high school, college, she was entrepreneurial, right? So in college, she started a house cleaning service in Nantucket to pay for her semester abroad while studying. She then went on to found Elizabeth Gregg, which is a bridesmaids dress company. And, that enabled her to partner with Nicole Heidemark. And, she was the founder of the Wedding List, and they partnered with Nordstrom. And that ended up becoming a successful company. So they sold the Wedding List. She then became a consultant. She worked with Jessica Alba on Best & Co., which is pretty cool. And then she went on to found Beautycounter. So, I mean, she has been very entrepreneurial. And even right now, I mean, she is on the board of directors of Smart Sweets, which I love. I love that candy. And so it's pretty incredible. She has done a lot. She's been an entrepreneur, basically through her whole career. And I mean, the founding story of Beautycounter is pretty unique as well, because the idea, really came from wanting to develop safe and natural beauty products for women and families. And Greg got inspired after watching Al Gore's famous documentary, An Inconvenient Truth, which like, it's crazy that came out in 2006, which like,
When did we get old? Oh
yeah,
my
it's
god.
wild. I mean, I remember when that came out and it was such a groundbreaking documentary. It was really
I
just
know.
amazingly well done.
I remember watching it, and I had I think I'd seen it like my freshman year in college, and so I'd gone up to Case Western, this very liberal school up on the water, and I came back and I like made my family watch it, and I tried to like talk to my parents about like this is a real thing you have to worry about, and they're like whatever. I'll have to ask my parents now if how they feel about it, but I was totally sold at that point, and they just thought it was the freshman liberalness kind of taking off, but. Yeah, that was certainly an impactful movie for me, and clearly for Greg as well.
Yeah. And so what she says is that when I looked for beauty products that were high performing and safe for my health, I saw a huge void in the market. So I decided to create them myself. She says it wasn't about the industry, it was always about the mission. And she had, close experiences with different health issues and diseases that, she thought might have been linked to the products that, she had used. And the name I thought was pretty interesting. How did she come across with the name Beautycounter? And so she wanted to have a name that she said was intentionally American, and she liked the idea of quote unquote going to the counter to see what the beauty industry had ever done. And so it was, I mean, a pretty incredible, founding story. I mean, I think it's interesting how she tied it back to Al Gore's, famous documentary. But what was kind of the product strategy approach from the early years?
Yeah, so it was a typical kind of beauty care company you would think about, with the big emphasis being on clean ingredients and doing things that really hadn't been done in the way that they want to do it. So they started off with things like cleansers, moisturizers, facial oils, things like that. And in 2017, they started to expand into cosmetics. So think foundations, blushes, lipsticks, eyeshadows. But then by 2021, they kind of had a full beauty suite, and that had shampoos, conditioners, body lotion, sunscreens, and they started a men's line as well. And so they had kind of come full circle, and we're doing all of these different types of products. And the key thing that was interesting about their product strategy was the way that they approached ingredients and the transparency in it. And so it harkens back to some of the other companies that we've covered, just around transparency and cost or pricing or ingredients. And their kind of claim to fame was creating this never list, and it was a list of 1,800 questionable or potentially harmful ingredients that they said would never be used in the product's formulations. And it's worth noting that this 1,800 is much larger than what other regulators would say is difficult, or even the industry would look at. So, for example, the laws that are regulating the U.S. beauty industry haven't been updated in more than 80 years. And you think about how much we've learned. 80 years ago, people thought cigarettes were healthy for them, as an example, right? And so we haven't changed those. The EU and Canada have banned hundreds of potential toxins, but the US has only banned about 30. And so you think about this, and like, the US is actually pretty far behind when it comes to regulation and consumer health. And there's an argument to be said, is there too much regulation? Should you let people kind of choose what they want? But they were looking at these things, trying to make them at an approachable price point. So it wasn't about creating something that was very clean and then pricing it at $500. Their lipsticks are $35, which is approachable for a lipstick. It's not the cheapest thing, but it's also not a super premium thing either. And so their focus from a product point of view was to make things that are safer than other products, but there were also just inherently good products themselves. And they won lots of awards from Allure, and really the brand was focused on health conscious Instagram influencers. They got a lot of love from celebs like Reese Witherspoon and Rashida Jones. And so that was really where they started.
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty incredible to kind of see how they developed, how the product came to be. I mean, and I think it's interesting too, because when you think of an MLM, you don't necessarily think they're going to get, endorsement from Reese Witherspoon or Rashida Jones, but they have, and that really helped them grow quite a bit. And Beauty Counter also became an advocate for just kind of personal care product safety in the U.S. So they passed 9 pieces of legislation that helped them kind of advance this agenda that I thought was pretty neat. I don't think you see many D2C companies focused on you know passing new agenda. And Greg would actually testify before Congress about cosmetic reform, which was pretty cool. And so a lot of social media outlets recognize Beauty Counter as one of the first brands to make clean beauty as its core value proposition. And I mean, when I think about like mission driven companies, to me, I always think of Tom's Shoes, right? Kind of the original buy one, give one type of model. And here, I think you have a beauty brand that, kind of started that clean beauty trend, but also like took a legislative route, right? I mean, Greg testified before Congress, which I think very few kind of e-commerce founders have ever done.
Yeah, I agree. And I was just trying to go through and think through some other brands that had a big mission as part of who they were and what they were doing. And you think about Allbirds that we covered a couple episodes ago. Patagonia comes to mind. Greystone Bakery and Ben and Jerry's and kind of their collaboration. So Greystone Bakery makes the brownies that go in Ben and Jerry's, and I think it's something where it's like, they have a lot of people who had just come out of prison working at the bakery. There's some tie in there where there's a social good for who's making the brownies. But yeah, I mean, like, these mission driven things, they seem to really resonate with folks.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, I think there's this balance of like kind of, I think, in the mid 2010s and so maybe in early 2010s there was this huge trend like that people were always kind of buy one give one, right, and really trying to emphasize that approach. And I, I just sometimes I question like, is that been overdone now, right? And are people doing that more now for like a marketing scheme rather than like actually being true to the mission? And so I think as I've seen brands that launch with a kind of purpose driven approach, I am a little bit, maybe I would say, skeptical of that compared to the past. Maybe that's just me as a consumer, but I don't know. That's what comes to mind when I think about.
I kind of agree with you. It feels like you're either a business first and a mission second, or a mission first and a business second. I mean, we've got several that we've covered or we've looked at where they genuinely believe in the mission, right? And so they're willing to have a smaller brand, or they're willing to because when you have a mission, you're trying to change the world and trying to force an agenda. And if you're really motivated by that mission, it's never quite done, right?
Yeah,
Uh, but if you're trying to build a business, you're like, hey, I want this to be, $400 million in revenue. Well, at some point, you've got to maybe not push as aggressively on the mission part because the market has to catch up with you, and you kind of go through that. So it's a difficult balance for sure. I think you're spot on.
yeah, yeah. So yeah, I thought it was pretty, unique that Greg launched with this MLM strategy, right? I think very few brands take this approach, especially kind of in the mid 2010s when they launched. I think her reasoning was she thought social media advertising was very expensive and it was going to be hard for her to acquire customers on that channel. Even though I don't know, if you ask me, if you compare, you know, Facebook cost now versus back in 2016, you could spend a lot of money more profitably back then, in my opinion. But there's always a unique angle when it comes to acquisition. And so, what stuck out to me when it comes to their MLM network is they call them kind of independent sales consultants, and they had over 60,000 registered ones as of 2021, which is pretty incredible. 60,000 registered kind of sales consultants. And what was different about their approach compared to kind of other MLMs is that they did not force sellers to buy inventory. And that's, kind of one of the main
That's huge.
criticisms that we talked about when it comes to MLM models is they, Beautycounter was not forcing these sellers to buy inventory, but consultants did have to hit a minimum sales kind of threshold to remain enrolled. And I think that was kind of how they enabled their kind of sales consultants to be and act more like micro influencers or affiliates rather than kind of true MLM style marketing. And I thought they connected, their sales consultants well on their website, right? So their website kind of serves as a hub, obviously, for customers to browse and purchase their products, but also connect with Beautycounter consultants. And so I think it's pretty unique how they tied in their sales team basically throughout their whole approach, right? I mean, the brand has its own stores and has landed in big box beauty retailers, but these independent sellers remain to be the majority of revenue for Beautycounter.
Yeah, and to me, I think that this MLM model is perfect because if you think back to how Beautycounter was being created, we talked about the inconvenient truth. We talked about the reason for sustainability, for clean beauty, for doing these sorts of things. And really, the thought here is that you find other people who are going to listen to your point of view, and either they believe the same thing that you believe right away, or they're willing to listen and hear those points. And so this was really more of a movement than a business. And it was about like, hey, we're going to try to make the earth a little bit better. We're going to try to improve our health a little bit more. And they could have been selling tacos if they thought it was, more sustainable or healthy, and people would have bought them. And so I think that like the fact that they use their consultants and these micro influencers in the way that was all the benefits of an MLM, which is, hey, I'm going to talk to people that I know, and I'm going to talk to people about these sorts of things. Maybe we've got screenings of inconvenient truth. Maybe we've got discussion about these other things. And it's like, hey, here's a small thing that you can do. Just swap out what you've been buying with something that's a little bit better for you, and you can feel good about that. And so that's all the beauty of the MLM. And what they did, what was super smart, is they said, look, we're not going to make you take any inventory risk. We're not going to make you take any sort of operational risk. We're not going to ship stuff to your house. And so the way it worked was wonderful, where you would go to the website, you'd find somebody, you'd have this conversation, you get really passionate about it, you figure out, hey, I'm going to change all my lipstick, all my shampoo, etc. And then they would place the order, and Beautycounter would deliver everything. I've actually been at their warehouse that did all the D2C stuff out. And from there, that person got a commission. And so it's just like any other affiliate business that you'd be looking to build today. And it was, in my words, just perfect for this sort of thing.
Yeah, yeah, no, I agree. I mean, I think they had a really strong go-to-market approach, and their financials show that, right? I mean, so 2012, they kind of start with a venture round of about 7.7 million. They then 2014 do a venture round with TPG Growth for 21.3 million. Revenue is said to have tripled compared to the previous year. Fast forward 2017, which is kind of the first time we have an insight on how big this company has gotten, and they do $225 million in revenue, in estimated revenue in 2017, which is pretty remarkable. I mean, I think most people that would see this company at the time from the outside wouldn't think they were at that scale, but I mean, it is pretty remarkable. So 2018, they're estimated to have 25,000 independent consultants, and they raised 65 million, led by Moise Partners. 2019, they're doing between 3 and 400 million. 2020, they do between 4 and 500 million. In 2021, the Carlyle Group acquires a majority stake in Beautycounter, valuing the company at over $1 billion. And 2022, they do about 340 million with about 65,000 independent consultants. And in 2023, it's estimated they do 4 to 500 million. So, I mean, $1 billion exit, that is freaking incredible, right? Congratulations to their team and, just everyone involved. But when you look at the business today, it looks like it's in the midst of a bankruptcy. What happened? What's going on here?
Yeah, if you go to the website today, they talk about how they are in an in-between phase. So the holding company, Counter Brands, is bankrupt, and they are talking about how they're going to relaunch and go through it. And so, yeah, this is a very fascinating story of something that seemed to be up and to the right, and then wrong transaction, wrong timing, wrong strategy, wrong everything kind of falls apart to the point where now they're worth nothing in terms of equity. So let's walk through it. So the Carlyle Group, which if you don't know is a publicly traded private equity company, they acquired Beautycounter in 2021 through a leveraged buyout. Basically means that they put a bunch of debt on the company and use that debt to fund the purchase price. The group that had purchased that had led the deal with Carlyle had some track record with retail and consumer brands in the past. So they had flipped Supreme and Golden Goose and had some pretty big exits there. And so there was a belief that they could do this again. So keep in mind too, in 2021, when this deal happened, there were a lot of exits that were happening. We were coming, just out of COVID, Zerk environment. You've got IPOs for Warby Parker, Casper, Figs, Wink, and there was a lot of pressure for these investors who put $100 million in to try to get some return out. So I'm sure that was kind of pushing them to do that deal at that point. And so when considering if they were going to do the deal and who they're going to work with, Greg worked with Jay Sammons. Have you heard of Jay?
Yeah.
He's actually very well known. He's done some great things. But he was there leading the Carlyle's consumer, media, and retail division. He was there for about 16 years at the time. And he's the one that had led those deals. He had done Beats by Dr. Dre, and so that was acquired by Apple in 2014 for $3.2 billion. Supreme, which was acquired by VF Corp for $2.1 billion. And Renfrew was convinced that with Sammons on board, that Carlyle would stay true to the Beautycounter mission and this community-centric approach that they had built. Well, the goal or the thesis from Carlyle's perspective was, hey, we want to buy this company, we want to accelerate what's already happening, and we want to increase its brand awareness. We want to make sure that the business model is being innovative and invigorated, and we want to move it from mostly MLM to more of an omni-channel business. And the thought was that if we do these things, we can triple the revenue and then take the company public after that, which sounds great. I mean, this team had done this before. It looked like the trajectory was up and to the right, and things were going there. Almost as soon as the acquisition closed, Beautycounter's revenue started to spiral downward. And so in 2022, just a few months after the deal had been consummated, Jay left Carlyle to become a founder and managing partner of Sky Ventures, which is Kim Kardashian's venture fund. And so to some extent, all of this expertise, all of this understanding that was struck between Greg and Jay was gone. And there wasn't a guarantee that Carlyle was going to act the same way they did. Well, according to Carlyle, the revenue started to decline almost as soon as the acquisition closed. They feel now, and it's proven true, that they bought at peak hype and peak valuation, which is not what you want to do when you're an investor. But they've since said that they're no longer doing buyouts in this space because it went so bad. But basically, Renfrew was the CEO at the time of the acquisition. And with revenue declining, she stepped down from the CEO role in 2022, so just a few months after that. And so they thought that the problem was that they needed more professional leadership. And so they brought in someone by the name of Mark Ray, who was a man, which I think is an important piece to point out in this woman-led company. He was the former CEO of Shiseido America, so big cosmetics expertise, knew what he was doing, etc. Like that. Renfrew stayed on as the chief brand officer and chairman of the board. But whenever you've been the boss and you're like there for a while, like it's very difficult to now start being the one who's taking orders versus giving orders. And so they didn't really work well together. And that leadership change too was also very jarring because many of Beautycounter's earliest hires who were instrumental in building Beautycounter resigned, and they said that this isn't what we signed up for. We're going in the wrong direction. Those sorts of things. And so again, sales continue to collapse. You're starting to shed some of that talent, some of that people equity that you built. Well, then they thought that the problem was maybe distribution. And so they said, okay, we are going to sign a nationwide deal with Ulta and in 2023. And so we're going to put our products everywhere. And that helped achieve one of the objectives of making the brand much more well-known and raising its awareness. But you also damaged the MLM consultant network where people who, it used to be you go to the website, you say, I want to buy this, say, great, here's your consultant, like talk to them, maybe virtually, maybe online. Well, now people can just go to Ulta and get it. And so by 2024, the number of consultants had fallen to almost a third by what they had in 2021. And some of these folks would go on and sue Beautycounter in 2024 because they just saw their sales returns slashed by the company's changing policies. And so much is starting to like go wrong here. They've changed the leadership. They're losing people. They're alienating their distribution base. When a company is thinking about changing their business model, of course, there's going to be some level of cannibalization. But if you were advising a brand who is thinking about this, how do you approach that? How do you weigh those choices?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's kind of crazy because it basically ruined their business, right? I mean, I think imagine if Beautycounter, instead of taking this other approach, had focused on, okay, how do we triple the size of the number of independent sales consultants that we have, right? Instead, they kind of took this other approach that didn't empower these, sales consultants that they had with their MLM strategy. And I mean, it just caused their demise basically, right? I mean, they abandoned their original sales strategy, go to market strategy, and even ended up in a lawsuit where some of the biggest independent consultants filed a lawsuit in January 2024 against Beautycounter when they saw their sales returns slashed because the company's changing policies of going into Ulta like you had discussed and kind of changing their marketing strategies. And so I mean, the company continued to decline. I think after 8 months of handing the reins to McKenzie, Carlisle asked Greg to return as CEO, and Greg attempted to find new capital partners or someone to acquire, but everyone pulled away when they got inside the books and saw the business fundamentals because there was just a ton of debt that Carlisle put on this through this leveraged buyout. So on April 17th, 2024, 2 months, after returning, all 200 plus employees were asked to join an emergency Zoom meeting in which Greg, basically had to announce to all of our employees that should be firing them without severance, which is, I mean, just pretty insane to think about. I mean, Aaron and I both founders, here, and I mean, I can't imagine having to like host a Zoom meeting like that where you're kind of like throwing in the towel almost. You're like, hey, we can't operate this business anymore. We've got too much debt here. We're going under. I mean, what do you think was like going through Greg's head there? Because I mean, this is her baby, right? I mean,
yeah, to some extent, it is hard to feel bad for the CEO who's firing a bunch of people because they'll go be a CEO somewhere else most likely. but I can certainly see the perspective of some of the folks that were laid off, the full-time employees, because it was such that, hey, you just made 50 million bucks on this deal that happened, 2 years ago. It's been absolute chaos since then. Um, you know, why don't you give us some of that money, right? It would be a request that some people would have, even if it was a week or 2 weeks or things like that. But I also feel really bad for Greg because I mean, she came back. She watched this train wreck happen, and then Carlisle asked her to come back weeks before doing this decision. That at that point they already knew what it was, and so to some extent they really set her up to look like the bad guy and to do these terrible things. But um, they probably should have stuck with someone else who didn't have that connection. Anyways, yeah, not offering severance is pretty bad, especially when you are a multi-billion-dollar company like Carlisle.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's just crazy. I can't imagine having to do that. And I mean, people say, it was basically Greg was just executing what others had decided. It wasn't necessarily like her choice or her decision to do that. But yeah, as you mentioned today, the company's website's unavailable. But what's interesting is that there are still some of their products sold through other channels like Ulta Beauty. And I think that the challenge here is the longer Beautycounter, takes to reopen, the harder this balancing act becomes, right? I mean, experts say like when multi-level marketing companies stop growing, their intricate webs of independent salespeople can quickly collapse as it becomes harder for these consultants to recoup startup costs or recruit new members. So it's kind of like, once the train wreck starts, it's hard to recourse and stop it, right? And so I think it's going to be a big challenge to get this back on course. But I think what was interesting, or one takeaway I saw, is that Greg obviously had really strong connections with, her MLM network, and so probably as a way to keep her relationship strong with these independent consultants, she actually helped get some consultants a new job at a rival MLM called Airbone, to I guess help them get a soft landing, which I think shows, hey, she cares about these sales consultants. Maybe the Carlisle group didn't see like the true kind of power in their go-to-market approach and sales approach, but she really, I think, sees the strength and power of these independent sales consultants. So I don't know. I mean, what do you think was the issue here? Was it the leadership? Was it distribution? Like, what was the issue here?
In my mind, the only rational answer is the product, which sounds a little bit counterintuitive, but let me go on for that. Um, they were the first clean beauty company, and when they launched in the mid 2010s, this was new, this was novel, this was something that people were curious about. Well, fast forward, and they're now one of dozens of clean beauty companies out there. I mean, I can think of, you got Merit Beauty, you've got Say, you've got Glossier to some extent. There are all of these other brands that are beauty brands first, and then they are clean as like a prerequisite, so to speak. And so for them, they never really led on the product innovation side. They kind of, still had the 1800, never list. The people knew it was a clean beauty thing, but there wasn't anything exciting or new about it. And so they kind of lost the market, and they won. In some ways they succeeded because they created this market, and people said, hey, this is a great thing, let's do it. And they gave birth and gave room to all of these other clean beauty brands that have taken most of those customers. But the other, they haven't led in either product innovation or in kind of making that 1800 never list being 3600 or things like that. And so it's a difficult piece that way.
Yeah, I mean, I think the story also teaches a lot about private equity, right? Especially leverage buyouts. I mean, to put that much debt on a business, your sales and revenue don't have to drop that much to be in a tough spot, right? And I think that's really what happened with beauty counters. They just had so much debt on their books through this leverage buyout that, when their sales were in decline, they were in a really bad position to continue to maintain and grow the business because they had debt payments they had to make, right? So I mean, what's crazy to me as I was pulling some data around that is in 2023, 104 private equity and VC backed companies went bankrupt, which is the highest total on record in a year. And a study from Cal Poly found that 20% of companies acquired by PE firms through leveraged buyouts go bankrupt within 10 years, as compared to 2% in the control group. So I don't know if leverage buyouts are the best way to acquire a business. Like if I was selling, a company and a PE firm said, "Hey, yeah, we're going to buy this with a bunch of debt. We'll get you some cash out and we'll continue to grow." I'm definitely going to question the fundamentals there because it seems like most of these leverage buyout deals can end up in a rocky position.
Oh, for sure. It could be a great exit for the shareholder. So if someone's like, "Hey, we're going to give you $200 million for your business and we're going to write you a check and that's it. And who cares how we pay for it?" If I was looking to cash out and I didn't really care what happened in the business, then yeah, like a leverage buyout makes sense.
Yeah, yeah. So I mean, it's pretty incredible, just journey and story. And I thought like to kind of showcase how much Greg really believes and loves Beautycounter is she has now purchased some of the Beautycounter assets from Carlisle lenders. And she says, quote unquote, "In many ways, I felt like there was really no choice. If there was something I could do to keep the movement going, I had to do it," she wrote. And so, I mean, I think it goes to show she believes in Beautycounter. She wants to keep it going, wants to see it, continue to thrive, even though many former employees are frustrated with how Beautycounter treated them and said they wouldn't go back to Beautycounter as an employee.
Yeah, it's a difficult thing for sure. And do you have any initial thoughts on what you would tell Greg if she asked for your advice?
I would say go back to the fundamentals, right? I mean, she has obviously strong connections to some of the biggest, independent sales consultants there are. I'm sure they have a strong connection still, though there's been, choppy and rough ground in the past. I think she could continue to grow with that existing community and lean into that, right? I think that's where kind of Carlisle went wrong, is kind of steering away from that main go to market strategy that worked for them from day one. I mean, 60,000 independent registered sales consultants is pretty incredible. And I mean, if you think about that on the scale of kind of total beauty consumers, that's a small portion of beauty, customers in America, right? So imagine if they had just focused on 3xing the number of independent sales consultants, the company would probably be worth even more today.
Yeah, I don't disagree with you. I think if she were to ask me for my unsolicited advice, I would think about two things. The first one is, well, the assumption that I'm coming at is I think that the Beautycounter brand and business model is toast in its current form. I think that there's too much bad blood from the MLM people that got burned, and then yes, there's this thing going on in Ulta, but it's there. But I think that there's still value in those pieces. But I would actually rebuild it being very completely different. And what I would do is I'd have two different parts of it. Um, the first one is Greg has always talked about how this was a mission first. And so I would take part of it. Maybe it's the Beautycounter name, maybe it's something different. But I would look to create a nonprofit, a certification element that is all about the movement. And it's all about clean beauty. It's all about sustainability. It's all about health and those sorts of things. And their sole existing purpose is to push the envelope on these sorts of things. And I would take the perspective of we don't have to have 100% market share to win. We want to be the voice that's basically out there saying, here's what's actually good. Here is what is a baseline requirement for other brands that are out there. Here is what's bleeding edge. And we're going to go through and suss out all of that. And we're going to certify other clean beauty brands that are out there. Because as technology is evolving, as the market's evolving, what was cutting edge 3 years ago may be baseline expectations today. And if I'm a consumer that really cares about this, I want to be able to understand and award and support those companies that are pushing the envelope. So that's the first thing. I would take Beautycounter effectively and make it a certification arm and a vehicle to just talk about and push the envelope for everything. And you could probably keep like Beautycounter selling at Ulta. Maybe that's funding a good portion of those sorts of things. Then the other thing that I would do is I would resurrect this MLM network that's tied into that movement and try to use that distribution network to partner with other clean beauty brands that are out there. And you think about it, if you tap into this ecosystem where you're talking, you've got this audience of people who are passionate about health, they're passionate about the environment, they're passionate about those sorts of things. They're already going to be talking to each other anyways. And if you create a platform, a tech enablement business where I can not only sell Beautycounter brands, but I can also sell Say or Merit or whatever. Pick your brand that's coming up, even smaller brands. This could be a piece where they're coming in, they're selling through that. And because I believe that they had the perfect MLM model, which was, you're talking to people, they're evangelizing, they're helping you pick what they would want, and then they just got the commission, and someone else dealt with all of the supply chain inventory pieces. That could scale very, very quickly, and you're basically building this ground game, this affiliate model that other companies can tap into. And if you pair that with kind of the Beautycounter certification piece that's going on, then you start to really recognize and say, hey, you know what, Merit is doing some really great stuff on these areas, but these areas they're kind of falling behind. And so, if you really care about this, the best one that we see out here from a safety perspective is actually this one coming from Say. And so you just think about what that would do for consumers, the trust, and they would be successful in moving that movement and market forward by doing those two things.
Yeah, I dig it. I dig it. I mean, I think my takeaway from Beautycounter is that every brand in today's market needs to have some sort of, affiliate or independent kind of sales type of consultant, right? That people can relate to, that people can talk to. E-commerce is really, it's consumers, right? I mean, you've got to build a relationship with them. You've got to build trust. And I think the best way to do that is through a community or, sales consultants like Beautycounter had, or affiliates or influencers. I mean, I think that's kind of the main strategy that I would take away from this episode. And this was awesome. I mean, I'm impressed by the scale of Beautycounter. Kind of crazy to see their exit and where they're at today, but I think the future is going to be bright for them. And yeah, really, really appreciate everyone tuning in to this episode of E-Commerce on Tap, brought to you by Source Finance. But leave a comment, leave a review, let Aaron and I know what you think about this on E-Commerce on Tap, and we'll hear from you next time.